Here we go. And there we are. We're everywhere. Hello to everyone. And welcome to History Matters and So Does Coffee. Um, we I'm getting applause just for being here, maybe. At any rate, I'm really, really happy to be back. I did not like missing episodes, but I'm back. And today we're going to talk about, in a way, America on the world stage, sort of. But before I even plunge into that, you guys are with the emoji today, man. I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. As always, I'm delighted to be here with you Friday morning. We've got a lot of our regulars and also some new folks I'm noticing here in the chat. So please continue to introduce yourselves if you're with us on Zoom. Make sure your chat is set to everyone because a few of you are only chatting to myself and Joanne and Claire, and so other people can't see the great things that you're adding there. Here's how this is going to work. Joanne is going to talk about today's topic for about 30 minutes. We keep chatting away. That's a part of our community. But if you have a question about today's topic, that goes down the Q&A so that when I come back in about 30 minutes, we can easily find your questions and we'll get through to as many of them as we can. So we'll see you in a little bit.
Excellent. And indeed, if you are here for the first time or the second time, definitely say so in chat, and you will get a robust welcome from our wonderful History Matters community. And oh no, I have no idea what episode this is. Carolee had better beam in here really quickly. Oh, there you go. Okay, 284. 284. Okay, 284. This is our 284th episode, folks. You'll get a really robust welcome. Look, this is an amazing community. Okay, so obviously what inspired my topic this week was the UN. The meeting of the UN, some things that happened at the UN. Um, this week, early in the week, when I headed off to New Haven for my teaching week, um, I had forgotten, and I had even written it in my calendar, that, like, no, it's UN week. And the reason I did that is because getting anywhere in New York, unless you're on the subway, is impossible. And I forgot. So I was like, oh, I'm heading off to New Haven for the week. And then was like, oh, there are no taxis because they're probably all at hotels picking up important people. Or people aren't driving because all the streets are closed off. So I forgot. So the UN has been on my mind all week. However, I won't go into much commentary or detail on it, but the President of the United States spoke for what, 45 minutes, an hour in front of the UN. And I did not watch, read, or hear that speech. What I heard said of it was meandering and made strange claims. And I don't even have to say more. It was just that kind of a speech that had a loud response, and there were people from other countries, sort of in other um, media, sort of, commenting on what it was. And what it made me think about, because obviously what happened there was the president, as he is, in true form. And people saw that and people responded. The UN represents, in one way or another, the world watching. And granted, like, the world is always sort of looking around and watching, but the UN represents, like, real, literal, here's a room full of the world, and they are performing for each other, or they're supposed to be, and they are watching and they are drawing conclusions. So that in and of itself is important. The fact that what happened this week appears to have been highly problematic made me think about moments in the past when Americans have really been thinking about their national reputation. And the fact of the matter is, from its very beginning, the United States has been focused on the reputation it has in the eyes of the world for different reasons over time. So I'm just closing down chat here. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Better. Initially, given the way that the United States was formed, that it's, deliberate and placed in time. And now we're a nation and now we're on the world stage. So now we have to have some kind of a reputation. The United States early on was particularly obsessed with what the rest of the world thought about the United States. During the Revolution, there was an important component to that because the revolutionaries desperately wanted foreign aid once it became an out and out war. And particularly, they wanted aid from the French, but they just wanted aid. And they were very aware of the fact that if people didn't believe that they were real, right, that they were actually doing something deliberately and in an organized manner, and that they might actually win, there would be no aid forthcoming. So it was after the Battle of Saratoga, right? The Battle of Saratoga happened. It was a victory for the revolutionaries, and they were like, "Okay, we got a victory. Like maybe now we can get some foreign aid." And they were thinking that way because they were understanding that the rest of the world, if they're going to invest, they're watching the investment. Reputation matters. And at that point, that was a matter of um, security. It was survival, right? At that point, reputation for the revolutionaries was a matter of survival. It's worth noting that even the Declaration of Independence, founding document of the United States, and is vitally important because it declared independence. But part of the reason for it was for the eyes of the world, right? It was to show the world, yes, it was for the American people to, and it was read aloud in front of courthouses, and it was a performance in America, but it was also written for the eyes of the world to see what was going on here. So it is a document that was about, in addition to sort of reality and wartime needs, it was about reputation. It was about what the rest of the world was thinking about us. So in that way, the Declaration, all throughout the war, Americans sort of desperately worrying that, please, world that isn't Great Britain, take us seriously. It mattered a lot. Now, that changed over time. Uh, so when the government first begins to get underway, and now we're talking about the 1790s, now we have this new government. It's a democratic republic in a world of monarchies. And there's very much, on the one hand, a feeling that among Americans, particularly elite Americans, that they need to prove to the world, look what we're doing. And it's all over the language, the rhetoric, the writings. I know at some point I've read the second half of the first paragraph of Hamilton's first Federalist essay, in which he says, we're deciding for all time whether you can create a government through deliberation and choice, or if it will always be a product of warfare and chance. And the crisis at which we are arrived may determine that for all time, right? And if a wrong part of that we shall act, if we act a wrong part here, it may deserve to be considered as the general misfortune of mankind. That's his language. Anyway, so there's that idea, right? We're doing something here. It's different. It's not how nations typically get created. There's like a broader significance to it. It's bound up with big principles about even human nature. So there is an idea that what was happening here, on the one hand, was an experiment. I've said that probably 800,000 times because they said it 800,000 times. But part of that, and they meant it, was an experiment before the eyes of the world. If you're a new nation, you're going to care a lot what the rest of the world thinks about you because, as our nation at the time did, we had no power, right? You don't have power. We didn't really have money per se. I mean, Hamilton was trying to work on that, but we didn't really have money. We didn't really have like an army, a standing army. We were really, really weak. I always, in my teaching, describe the early US as a fly speck on the windshield of the world because the England and France were sort of smacking us around from one side to the other, and we just didn't have a lot of power. So in that sense, too, people in the 1790s were really, really focused on what the rest of the world thought of us. Interestingly, there were other countries that were, even from that early point, people from other countries were curious at first, just about what the heck was going on there in the United States in this new non-monarchical country. So there's like, I remember as a grad student going to the library and finding the section where there were all of these travel accounts of people who came to the United States in the 1790s, a lot of them from France, to see what was happening. Just like, well, that's weird. What are they doing there? And what's fascinating about that, I'm going to come back to this idea in a little bit. What's fascinating about that kind of account is that these are outsiders beaming in and then announcing what they see from an outsider's point of view in a way that an insider would never see or say, right? So some of the things that these French observers said, particularly as a historian, when you're trying to get a sense of what things look like and you realize the biases of, the American accounts at that time, that some of the French observers, one of them said very early on, like 1790 or 1791, that when he looked around at what was going on in the new United States, he saw a lot of what he called British rust. It's like they have not wiped off all the Britishness, and you could see there's British rust, right? You would probably not get an American to see that or say that in quite that way, but it's really revealing. Someone else says, again, really revealing, he went in one of those 1991 early years and said that basically the American political elite all act like they're walking on a tightrope. That's wonderfully revealing. I didn't look up these quotes before I came on here. I remember them all these years because they capture so much about the mood and the ethos in the United States at that time. They're all walking on a tightrope because they're not sure if the next thing they do is going to be the bad thing, the wrong thing. So people from the beginning were interested in what was going on in the United States. They're interested to understand what the country was. And of course, from the beginning, Americans bragged a lot about what the United States was, right? So they talked all the time about, the best, the most, the first, the greatest, all of the things that I tell my students not to put in papers. Because if you write a paper and say, it was the first, the unique, the only, the best, you're almost always wrong. But, in early America, again, they had a little bit of an inferiority complex and a superiority complex at the same time. We're better than everybody, but everybody seems better than us. So it was a kind of a weird mindset, but they were always thinking about what the rest of the world was thinking. And partly for matters of national reputation, partly because what the world thinks is going to affect us economically, partly because what the world thinks can affect us as far as national security is concerned, but they thought a lot about what the world was thinking and bragged a lot about it. Now, when you get to the early, I don't know, let's say the 19th century, like the 1830s, 20s, probably the 1830s, the two things I'm thinking of, I think, happened in the 1830s. Now, by that point, you have people coming from Europe, and I'm going to talk about one person from England and one person from France, noteworthy people who come because now, at this point, it's been, a whole 2 decades, maybe almost 3 decades of this new government that is not a monarchy, and it's surviving so far, and it's supposedly more democratic and then pronouncedly more democratic than the old world. And so there's all of this, rhetoric among Americans about how wonderful what they're doing is. Equally important, the rest of the world, or at least many people in the rest of the world, kind of want that to be true, meaning they want to believe that there's something going on in the United States that represents something better than what has been. And you can hear this in the accounts of people who are writers and go to the United States and travel around. And particularly when you look at some of their letters and thoughts they have before they get to the United States, they are fascinated to see democracy in action, right? That's America is democracy. It's New World democracy. What does that mean? What does that look like? People are excited to know. So again, Americans are like, yes, sirree, this is us. And the rest of the world is saying, this is fascinating. Some of us, we want to get over there and get a look. So, for example, you have Charles Dickens, who comes to the United States, I want to say in the 1830s, and in letters beforehand, he says along the lines of what I just said, like, wow, what's going on there? There's democracy in action. I can't wait. And clearly, he's been reading news and trying to understand things about the United States before he goes, because I came across him during this time period because he goes to visit Congress during this trip. And of course, I'm writing about Congress in this period, and lo and behold, there's Dickens writing about his visit to Congress. Now, interestingly, he specifically asks for certain people to be pointed out in Congress, and they're the violent people, like Henry Wise. He wants to see who Henry Wise is. So he's been watching and listening up on what's going on in the United States. He also knows what's going on in the United States, right? It's like it's not all charm and beauty. A little wackiness, at least, is going on there. I want to see it. Like I want to understand. So people are pointing out the I refer to them, as the crazy people, but largely Southerners who are physically violent a lot. And he knows their names, which I found fascinating, and he wants to see them. What's fascinating about this, he starts out beforehand interested and excited to go. He goes and he travels around throughout different parts of America, and he begins writing letters back to folks back in England, making it really clear that he's profoundly disappointed, like really disappointed, because it's not what he thought America was going to be. It's not what he thought the United States was going to be. And I wish I didn't have time to look up the language. But there's a letter in which he sort of says something like, I had really dreamed that something else was possible and that I was going to see something else. And that's not what I saw. And some of what discourages him, it's not all my crazy Henry Wise violent congressman that discourages him. Really, what discourages him is him seeing slavery. He travels to the South. He could see the state of society there, about a society bound up to that degree in slavery. He goes thinking experiment in democracy, how exciting. I hope somehow part of it is true. And he leaves saying, what I wanted to see was not there. It was not there. This last week in my mega lecture course at Yale, I assigned people were reading, and we talked about Alexis de Tocqueville, another literary foreign visitor who, writes multi-volume book, Democracy in America. So he makes it clear what he's interested in and what he's looking at. He partly makes the trip because the United States was trying new forms of prison to try and come up with, sort of better and potentially even more humane modes of prison reform. So in part, Tocqueville and others are interested in like, what are the Americans doing there? But Tocqueville, obviously, and if you haven't read Democracy in America, it's big. And I think you don't have to sit and read page by page by page to really get a lot out of it. It's an amazing account of Tocqueville and his friend meandering around and talking about what they see. Again, from an outsider's point of view, so you see things like, Americans always assuming that, their country is 18,000 times better than every other country. Or he writes a lot about how that Americans, like they're always moving around. Why are they moving around so much? They plant themselves somewhere, they start to build a house. They don't even finish building the house. They move somewhere else. He's can't quite figure out what's going on there. He's fascinated by it. But again, he aspects of it he thinks are interesting and good. Aspects of it he's horrified by. Again, slavery, just the institution of slavery is horrifying to him. But even something like he picks up really early on American individualism. He sees, and one of the weird things about the United States to European observers was just how big it was geographically, right? It's so spread out, it's so dispersed, and that's just not how the rest of the world generally, to Europeans at least, not how Europe is laid out. And Americans themselves didn't quite know if a small r Republican mode of government could work because republics rely on people being informed and interacting and acting together. How do you do that in a widespread republic? So it's big. And so one of the things Tocqueville picks up on is, Americans are very individualistic. They kind of have to be, but they're sort of out doing their thing for themselves, and they kind of overcome that to some degree by joining in voluntary associations, meaning clubs and things. He goes on, very famous part of Tocqueville is him talking about voluntary associations and how Americans don't necessarily have big communities around them, so they form their own, and that helps bring Americans together. Again, really observant, really interesting, really reflected when you are studying this time period. But the other thing he sees is that Americans, as individuals, individualistic people, um, are so often isolated and alone. That's different and not necessarily a good way, right? That the expansiveness of that nation can isolate people and pull them out of community in one way or another. So my larger point here is that kind of like Dickens, Tocqueville goes and he's a French aristocrat and he goes to the United States ostensibly to look at prison reform, but then he just wants to see what democracy looks like in America, very much like Dickens. And he can see positive things about it and he sees a lot of negative things about it. And um, the way in which he sorts through it, like he says at one point, and I have like my little abridged Tocqueville, I'm staring at it, and I didn't think enough to like bring it over here. But at one point he says, it's because Americans are sort of always grabbing after news and sort of always trying to inform themselves, and they're so scattered and isolated. He says, you can see how in that kind of government like one person who steps forward and promises to organize could have a lot of power, right? And he goes on and says something like, "I'm silly me for not getting it." He goes on to say something like, it would not be difficult in that environment with one, sort of master figure to get Americans to believe what you want them to believe. And once you get them to believe something, it's going to be hard to get them to unbelieve it. He really interesting observations about what are the strengths and weaknesses of a democratic kind of government. And again, I find that there's a poignancy in the idea that people like Dickens and Tocqueville have hopes, right? Even at the same time that they're like, well, I don't know, these, peasant Americans, who are they? Maybe they're going to be kind of crude, I don't know. But maybe there'll be something more there. They kind of really want to see that. Um, so America in the eyes of the world, in one way or another, perennial issue. Americans typically, in the past, early years were desperately trying to earn themselves some kind of reputation. Um, Over the years, obviously, when you get out of my time period, America's reputation is often bound up with the fact of force, right? So America becomes like, what do you want to call it? The police of the world, right? Guarding the world for democracy in one way or another. And sometimes that's really a matter of principle, and sometimes that's really a matter of force, and sometimes it's kind of both. Still, um, the United States, when it becomes a world power, it's thinking about the world in a different way, but it is still thinking about its reputation in the eyes of the world, and it's acknowledging that what other nations think matters. Sometimes force is a way to get other people to think of your nation in a certain way. And I have a quote here that I actually did find this morning. So Hamilton, I remembered the quote, and I'll mention how I found it today, which was all by itself interesting. Hamilton, as first Secretary of the Treasury and beyond that point, was really, really focused on national reputation. Not surprising, he also is focused on his own reputation, but he thinks a lot about the national reputation, about national credit and credit meaning financial, but also what the world thinks of the United States. And in his mind, in some way, that's everything. Your reputation, what you are in the eyes of the world ultimately is what you will be. And if you destroy your reputation, if you destroy your national honor, you are destroying your nation. And this is Hamilton. So he's writing this in 1797. He's writing it about France. This is right before America heads into what gets known as the quasi-war with France. It's never a full-blown war, but it looks like, we're headed into war with France. And Hamilton, for reasons that are partly partisan and political, and partly bound up with reputation, is venting about this. And he is venting in part about the fact that France is acting dishonorably before this war is happening. It's destroying its reputation. It's attacking shipping at sea. It's behaving dishonorably. And in response to that, this is what Hamilton says in an essay called The Warning. Then this is the warning number three. There may have been four or five warnings. He says, quote, "The honor of a nation is its life. Deliberately to abandon it is to commit an act of political suicide." I remembered that he said destroying the honor of a nation is committing political suicide. I found it this morning by going to Founders Online. If you don't know about it, you should, because it's all, word searchable founder-esque documents. I went to Hamilton as author and punched in suicide to see what came up. And there were like maybe six different things came up, which didn't know he went into that more often. But in this case, and in some of those other cases, it was about national honor. It was about national credit in every sense of the word. And it was about the fact that really, if you do not have national credit, if you do not have a good reputation as a nation, what are you in the eyes of the world? Because who you are in the eyes of the world matters. We don't exist in isolation, however much sometimes people like to pretend that we can exist in isolation. We can't, right? So the reality of the world is no country exists in isolation, and you deal with that as you choose to deal with that. But your reputation as a nation, your reputation amongst your own citizens, vitally important, and your reputation in the eyes of the world. The UN, along these lines, national reputation is fascinating because basically at the United Nations during its meetings along these lines that are, everyone comes to meet in this space. Nations are performing themselves literally before the eyes of the world. They are in a room, different leaders are addressing the UN, and in doing so, they are not just performing themselves as leaders, which they are, but they're also performing their nation to a certain degree. That's part of what happens during these mass UN meetings. It's a moment in which a nation makes a strong statement about its reputation in that moment. It earns itself a kind of reputation. Again, I'm not going to say what kind of reputation it earns itself. That's been different over time. But this week was not a particularly good, wonderful reputation moment for the United States. Now, so part of why I brought this up is because I think it's important to realize, and it's not that I think we have been forgetting about it, but it's easy not to think about the fact, and we watched it this last week at the UN, that how a president behaves shapes, in the eyes of the world, what they think of the nation. It's not the only thing that shapes a national reputation, but it is a thing that shapes a national reputation to an extreme degree. It's not the only thing is an important point, and I'm going to end in a moment or two because I see I'm going a little bit long. It's not the only thing that matters because part of what makes the reputation of a nation is its people, right? Like a president can behave honorably or dishonorably. A president can push a nation, not a people, can push a nation into doing something dishonorable, can rely on force and not deal with principle. There are any number of ways in which a president can dishonor a country. But in the end, the full reputation of a nation is bound up in us, not just the president. To a certain degree, people know that what we're looking at, what they're looking at when they look at us right now is, okay, so this president was chosen by Americans, so to some degree it reflects Americans. We, the people, we get to like talk about what we think about this, right? I mean, we are part of America's reputation and character. By definition, it's citizenry. Its citizens are what really make the nation. So I bring that up because, on the one hand, it's important to realize the power that a president has in establishing that and the ways in which this president's performance of that matters. And you can decide for yourself what you think of that performance, but it's definitely a noteworthy, strong performance, more bound up with um, itself than with really thinking about what other people are thinking of us per se. But beyond that, it's important to realize that our national honor, our national reputation isn't only our president, never has been. That who we are as a people and how we respond in given moments, that's national character, that's national honor, that's national reputation as well. And that matters. So that's my 2 cents for this morning, only a few minutes long. I didn't watch chats because if I watch chat, I won't be able to continue talking. But at any rate, that is my thought, my UN inspired thought for the day. And now indeed it is mug time. Um, so for those of you who are new here, um, I have a mug every week. And it in one way or another, it reflects what we're talking about. This week I had a little bit of a challenge because I couldn't find a sort of, what the heck is the world thinking of us mug for this moment. Um, I think this is a Carolee mug. Carolee, you will have to tell me. And it says the same thing on both sides, but I will show you both sides. It says, history should make you uncomfortable. It should make you ask questions and challenge assumptions. It should make you think. I think this is a week when history should make us uncomfortable and enlighten us, but make us uncomfortable. I want to show both sides only because apparently I guess I must have said it in a tweet. So
That's
that was
definitely a Carolee mug.
that's why I'm thinking
Yeah.
it's a Carolee mug. Um, but yeah, this is the kind of week where you want to think about the impact of what's going on, the impact on Americans, the impact on us, and particularly really think about what the rest of the world is thinking about this moment. We keep, seeing glimmers of like, oh, these two nations are getting together to do something. Oh, these three nations are getting together to, that's interesting, and that's part of the response as to what our national character, our national reputation is at this moment. But Hamilton's statement, is another one of those statements that stands out for me, which is, basically, excuse me, to sacrifice national honor is to commit political suicide. I think that's valid in a lot of different ways.
Well,
So,
the chat has been crazy busy, as you can imagine,
okay.
and so has the Q&A. So if you're ready, we will jump in. Um, all right. First of all, Pax wanted to say congratulations on, he says, they say finishing your huge course, but you're still, have you given
Oh,
away to
yeah.
them?
No, it's my 800 person course. We each give 8 lectures, the three of us teaching it, me, David Blight, and Beverly Gage, and I finished my eighth lecture on
Okay. So you're
yesterday.
done. Now you get to sit back and watch David for a few
I get
weeks.
to watch David lecture now.
Oh, that's so awesome. Yay. Okay, well, there's a lot of love for you on that. So thank you, Pax, for noting
Thank
that
you.
accomplishment. We will all take a drink to that. Okay, so Sydney, our friend Sydney, our one of our favorite college students who joins us every week. Sydney says, I hear a lot of people saying the US is on the verge of collapse or the US won't exist anymore in 3 years. Is the US on the verge of collapse like the Soviet Union? Why or why not? That's a big question.
That's a really big question. Okay, so I think I had students coming up to me at the end of class yesterday asking big questions like this too. Um, is the US on the verge of collapse? I don't know. I mean, I can't say no. I think that actually would be irresponsible. I don't know where we are. And some of that depends on the response to what's going on right now. We can see the direction in which things are going. So that's not at the moment a question. The question is the response or the efficiency or the how widespread or disseminated what's going on is. I would not, and I think anyone who says we will not exist in 3 years is assuming a lot. I just honestly don't think we know. I think what we do know at this point is that we are going in a really bad direction. We are going in an authoritarian direction. Unless you like authoritarianism, and then you're all thumbs up. But to me, we're going in a really extreme direction, and it gets more extreme all the time. And to me, that is not a good thing. And so you can certainly say it's probably going to get worse. I would be comfortable saying that. Um, I also feel that at some point it's going to get better, but I don't know when that's going to be. Because ultimately, despite the fact that we the people, or some of we the people, have created this situation, goofy and Pollyanna-ish as it sounds, I have faith in the American people, most of them. And I believe that they fundamentally understand their rights, and at some point they're going to want them. At some point they're going to realize the degree to which they won't be present and they'll want them. So I do think at some point this is not the permanent state of affairs, but I don't know what that means. And I realize that that's not a satisfactory answer. And I realize it's not comforting for me to say, I don't know. Uh, but I don't think here's what I'll say. I don't think this is the end of the American experiment, but I don't know what form of the experiment will emerge when we get past this moment.
Mm.
You can look back at the Civil War, and the country that emerged from the Civil War was not the same country that went in. Its understanding of the Constitution was not the same. What it thought about national governance was not the same. It was a kind of a different country that emerged from the Civil War. So whatever's going on right now, down the road, however long that's going to be, we will have seen things and learned things and discovered things that we hate in new and exciting ways, or discovered things we love and value in new and exciting ways. And that will shape whatever we come to be. But this is something that I said from the very, very beginning when it first became clear that we were headed into crazy land, right? Headed into extreme contingency land. Um, and this might even have been something I said in the first practice episode of History Matters. Not sure, but it goes back that far. I said, in moments like the present, it is absolutely true that anything can happen, and that anything can be horrible. And a lot of what's happening now is horrible. And unfortunately, I do think it will get worse before it gets better. Um, so yes, in moments of extreme contingency, it's scary and you're afraid that things are going to be horrible. On the other hand, in moments of extreme contingency, those are moments when you can make change. Those are moments when you can step up and say, okay, here's a moment we haven't been in, but if we do X, Y, and Z, maybe we can make things better than they were before. Maybe we can bolster our rights in different ways. Maybe we can watch out for each other in different ways. I don't know like what the what is, but I know that when everything is in a state of change, you can make positive change. It means things aren't static, and that could be terrifying, but that can be inspiring, and that could be an opportunity. And I think about that all the time because I believe that. I don't have any sense of time frame, but I believe that.
All right. Dale has a great question. Our friend Dale from down the road from me in Williamsburg, Virginia. Dale says, you mentioned that the revolutionaries wanted the world to take them seriously and invest in their cause. At what point did Great Britain take the revolutionaries seriously as opposed to being taken seriously in current times?
Um, I want to come back to that. I just see, I want to address this because it's a smart question. Susan says she disagrees when I say that they don't have the power. I want to explain what I mean by that. Because I've said that a couple of times online that they don't have the power, and people are like, yes, they do. They have the power, and look at what they're exercising. When I say that, what I mean is this nation is vast. It's huge. And they do not have the ability, the power to address and affect this entire nation. It's just too big. So they are claiming that they can enforce what they want to enforce everywhere with power. And that kind of power they don't have. And I just think that's an important point to realize. I'm not saying they can't, that folks can't do horrible things, that they can't do horrible things and that there's, no accountability. Um, what I am saying is the scale of this nation means that things that they are claiming they can do, they can't. And that's important. That's what I mean when I say that. So thank you, Susan, for saying that. They don't have moral authority, but what I am talking about is just scale and size and the reality factor, because we have to think about that. And it's easy to forget that because kind of along the lines of when I was talking about individualism, right? We sort of sit in our space. I sit in my apartment and I, talk to you guys and I doom scroll or whatever it is I'm doing, and I'm in my space and I think, oh, this is where we are. This is, it's all bad. I can't see more broadly. And we forget it's very hard right now to take a couple giant steps back and see something like the simple scale of this country and the fact that big, scary claims aren't always going to be able to be fulfilled. And it's tempting to believe them because they're big, scary claims. And we should, just in the same way that I've said so many times on History Matters, if something makes you, if you hear or see something and it makes you upset, pause because someone might be really wanting you to get upset, right? You might be giving people the exact response they want, and what you're seeing might not actually be accurate. It might be, rage harvesting. This is, I think, a similar kind of idea, which is threats and claims. We need to watch them, we need to listen, we need to respond, but we also need to pause and think about what they mean in reality. And we have to acknowledge that sometimes big threats and big claims are threats and claims and actually can't be fulfilled in the way that they're being threatened. So it's important. Thank you, Susan, for asking that, because I think I felt like I was on social media saying all the time, I'm not saying they don't have power. I'm not saying people aren't doing bad things. I am saying if you say all of America will do, it's like, no, you will never make all of America do something. Think about the fact that, you can't even march into a city and make a city do anything. You know what I mean? So the scale matters. The scale is a reality factor, and we have to think about that. So I'm sorry, go back to the question. I didn't mean to.
No, no, not at all. Okay, we're going to go back to Dale's question. I'm going to repeat it. Um, Dale says, you mentioned the revolutionaries wanted the world to take them seriously and invest in their cause. At what point did Great Britain take the revolutionaries seriously as opposed to being taken seriously in current times?
So at what point did Britain realize, uh-oh?
And NCHE just had a webinar this week about it with Andrew Payne from the
Oh,
British Archives. And Andrew was on that trip with us this summer when we
oh,
took the teachers up to the Hudson River Valley. And he shared a bunch of really cool documents that he pulled from their archive. And
very
we're
cool.
repeating the trip this coming summer. If teachers are interested,
Very cool.
email me. Yeah,
Very cool. I
he's
mean,
very cool.
that's a complicated question to answer because there are probably different times at which different forms of uh-oh. When you watch how uh, Britain was responding to what was going on, you can see uh-oh by uh-oh. So like when they start out, they're assuming in some ways that what's happening there will be first, they assume they're just going to march around and be the British army and scare people and the rebels will just go away. That doesn't work really well. Then they think, okay, well, we're going to cut them off, cut the nation, cut them in two, get a major city, take the major city, and that'll break them down. And that doesn't do it either. They assume that fighting between the armies are going to follow sort of conventional European practices, and that doesn't happen either. There are all kinds of ways in which the British are doing what you would do if you've had centuries of fighting wars. They're fighting wars along the rules that they assume should be in place, but that's not always what's happening. And so when they keep realizing, well, we're not ending it this way, well, we're not ending it this way, well, this doesn't seem to have ended it. They're seeing over time, and when you actually when you look at correspondence between like British officers in the colonies, then states back home, a lot of them say things like, wow, this is these people like kind of along the lines of what I said, right? They had a sense of who the Americans were and their reputation, and that the officers are like, they're really pushing back. Like we thought this would be easy, and it's not. So I don't know if there's one moment, but I would say that they were learning that lesson repeatedly, and in part it was because things weren't happening the way they predicted that they should happen. You can still see though, I like when you read accounts of the surrender at Yorktown at the end of the war, what you read about, among other things, is the British being still stunned that that's what happened. Still just believing that that's what happened. And there are accounts by American soldiers who said, the British soldiers had to surrender their arms as part of the surrender, and that they were throwing their guns to the ground, like trying to break them in some way. They were outraged, but they were stunned that this is the way that the war seemed to have gone. So even taking what's going on seriously, whenever they decided to start doing that, even at the surrender at Yorktown, they're still like, what? Like, really? It shows you the degree to which, these old world empires were old world empires. That is really not the way people predicted that the American Revolution would necessarily end. Okay.
All right, good one, Dale. Dale always has good questions.
You always have good questions.
Yep. Okay.
Yes,
Joe
the world turned
Rafin
upside down, Tim. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, Joe Rafinsky, and I'm not sure if we've had a question from Joe before. Joe, if you're new, let us know in the chat, or maybe this is just the first time I've found one of your questions. Joe says, "What then would Hamilton say about today about national honor?"
Oh. Okay. Well, that's interesting. That's a complex response. So on the one hand, um, he would be really upset because he would believe that in countless ways to Hamilton, um, national honor was being destroyed. National honor was being sacrificed again and again and again and again. And, he talks about it all the time. And the idea that he was obsessed with his own reputation and worried about it being destroyed, and that he applied that same intensity to national honor, national reputation isn't surprising. So on one hand, I've thought about this in the past when our national credit, meaning our credit as a nation, our finances are sinking. The first thing that comes to mind is Hamilton's rolling in his grave. Hamilton's like, credit, credit is an entire thing, he says in his report on public credit. Credit is an entire thing. Wound one branch and you wound the whole. So he would certainly be upset and angry. However, Hamilton was also somebody who believed that force from a government was a way of getting people to respect it. And he was a little extreme in that way. We just in class this last week, I think, in my Hamilton Jefferson class this last week, we read a letter from Hamilton in which he says something like, whenever the government appears, it must look like a Hercules, right? Then always the government, the army, the nation, the threat of force has to be front and center because that will get people to respect you. So on the one hand, looking at right now, he would be howling in grief at the fact that he would say our national reputation is being savaged as he watches other nations sort of turn their back on us and go work with each other. On the other hand, some part of him would be thinking about, like part of what's going on now has to do with displays of force, maybe not strategic, but how he would feel about that is a longer question, but a really interesting one to consider. So that's, I guess, my partial answer.
Okay. And then Pax has kind of a follow-up to that. Is wondering maybe the early self-esteem issues we had as a nation were was what eventually led to the adoption of American exceptionalism.
Oh, well, I think American exceptionalism also has kind of always been there, but I think they go hand in hand, right? So I mean, from the beginning, I think, Americans have been like, look at what we're doing. It's different. It's better. We're different, better, first, unique, whatever, all of those things. Look at us. And you can see that, um, all kinds of accounts. In my revolution course, I quote, there's a Dr. Alexander Hamilton who is not the one we just talked about, and he's wandering around in the colonies. Uh, he's British. And one of the things he says is like, these Americans, like, they brag about everything. They think everything that they have is exceptional. And I think he says something along the lines of, if there are rocks and stones in the road, they will tell you those are the best stones and rocks in the road. It's like Americans always have this sense that they are exceptional. Now, the downside to that, and I've been howling about American exceptionalism for years now, if you truly believe that your nation is exceptional in every way, you don't believe that normal rules apply to it. And that is profoundly dangerous thing to believe. And I think for a very, very long time, way longer than it should have been, Americans have been thinking, well, this horrible bad thing can't happen here. Those things don't happen here. Some of what we're seeing now, it can't happen here. It's never happened here. We're America. We're exceptional. It can't happen here. I think years ago I said something like American exceptionalism is blinding Americans to what is happening right in front of their eyes. And I still believe that for some people that's probably true. That we're so it's so immersed, so within us, the idea that we're just an exception to every rule, and it's so, in a sense, part of American culture to some degree that it becomes easy to miss the fact that rules apply to us just like they apply to everyone else, and that we need to recognize that sooner rather than later, because sometimes later is too late.
All right. Deb and Paul, who join us every week, I think. They're very longtime members of the community. Okay, so Deb is saying some may disagree, but it seems to me that Trump's domestic policy has a lot in common with Republican policy since Reagan. But Trump's almost total disregard for the opinions of the rest of the world seems like a total departure. Any thoughts on the reason for this difference?
Well, I suppose I'll answer a small part of that question. I do think, and I suppose it's part of what inspired me today, is that he isn't really thinking about what the rest of the world thinks of us, only to the degree that if I'm threatening and I make big claims, I will impress them. I think that's the degree of that's what we're watching now, which is pretty oblivious as to not really thinking about or understanding what other people think about him or of the nation. So he really ultimately, it would be easy to want to argue against this, but ultimately he really isn't thinking in any kind of a realistic sense about what the rest of the world thinks of us. He just thinks if he is loud and threatening, then he will get what he wants. And to some degree, that works, but that isn't grounded on what people think of you, right? People can be giving you something and also assuming that they want nothing to do with you. They're not going to join with you ever again. They don't want to be friendly with you and they will never be your ally. There are implications and repercussions. There will be accountability for everything that's going on now, and we can't control how other countries are going to respond to us. And I think to some degree, our current president thinks he can control that by being threatening and loud, and he can't. He can't. And so what we're watching is how the rest of the world is responding to this, and then we're having to calculate what it's going to mean. What will that mean for us as Americans, as citizens, as people? Um, so yeah, we're watching someone who really ultimately isn't really thinking about what the rest of the world thinks of us. And America first, America only, is not a responsible or safe place to be in a world that is interconnected and in which no nation is isolated.
So John Howe was asking, other than reading newspapers around the world, how we find out what the other nations think. I mean, my first thought is social media. I mean, a lot of people are weighing in, but you might have
Well,
other.
this is a goofy answer, but it the first thing that popped into my head. So w when I can't sleep, so we're like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, something like that. I do what you're not supposed to do, which is pick up my phone. Actually, sometimes that really makes me sleepy, but there's a certain time really early in the morning, certainly here on the East Coast, in which everyone in England is weighing in. They're talking about British politics, they're talking about the United States. All of social media is Great Britain, is England. And that's a fascinating thing because Americans largely, there are people like me who are awake, but it's like I feel like I get a little bit of a read, at least however much of a read you can get from social media, as to what people are saying. First of all, what people are saying in England about England, but also what they're saying about us. So that's a goofy, hardly representative or responsible way, but it never fails for me to get like a little bubble of Britishness when I'm looking at social media at a certain really early hour. You're right, it's hard to do. And sometimes, like I have not watched a lot of news lately because it makes me want to scream, but like I would be intrigued to see how the BBC talks about what's going on here. I would be intrigued to see, I would want to see foreign media, foreign newspapers, uh, talking to their own citizens about us to get a sense of what they think of us. That's kind of like where I started, right? That you get people observing something from the outside and then talking about it, and ideally talking about it with other people like them from someplace else, and you get all kinds of insights. So, I also think part of the way you understand how people think about a country or our country is in what they do. If a bunch of nations join together and make a decision, and it's the sort of decision that the United States would have been involved in the past, and they're just not invited to take part in it, that's a pretty strong statement, right? So we see a lot of that kind of thing happening now too. So every time you see two or three nations get together and come up with like a major policy about world peace, whatever. Those are the sorts of conversations in which the United States always would have been involved in the past. And the fact that we're not involved now tells you a lot about what these foreign nations are thinking about us. We are not a trustworthy partner. We are not the people you invite to that kind of conversation.
Yeah. And I put a link in the chat. The museum, which the brick and mortar one is gone now, which really made me sad. I loved that place.
It was
But they
great.
do still have an online presence, and they have a link on their site called Newspapers Front Page Today that has front pages of every newspaper in the United States, I think, and then several from other countries. And that's a really powerful teaching tool that I used for years. And I put that link in the chat. The Forum took it over when the museum folded.
Could
But
you put the link up again now that people will look for it?
yeah,
That's really smart.
yeah, it's a great website. They used to have this exhibit. I don't know if it's on the digital site, but they had a wall. Did you ever go to that building, Joanne, when you were in DC? The
When it was
museum?
like a real museum?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Two things that I always were just so powerful. One was they had the picture of every journalist who was killed in the line of duty, like
Wow.
trying to report on the truth around the world. And I remember the last time I took a group of kids there was after Danny Pearl was killed.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm sure they added a few more before the building closed, but then they also had this incredible map of the whole world, and it showed the degree to which each country in the world had a free press. And I'm just curious if that exhibit were still in existence today, would we have been downgraded?
Right. Right. Um,
Because we used to be one of the only ones that had 100%, you know.
right. And I
I
would
don't know if
think
we can
not
say that
100%.
after what happened last week and last few months.
No. Well, that was like when our credit was downgraded, however
Mhm.
long ago it was.
Yeah.
And that was when I was like, Hamilton is dying again right now. But
Mm.
anyway, no, I wish, yeah, I wish it still existed. I know that I answered like three questions and there are lots of questions, but it's a little after 11. Maybe,
Yeah, it is.
maybe we,
We have a couple that were specifically for the after party, but we
oh,
do still
okay.
have a good many left over,
What?
so we're never going to get to all of them.
Oh,
Um,
Claire is gone.
oh,
Is
I'm
there,
here. I'm here.
wait, so you can save them?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think so. I think so.
Because sometimes, they're saved and they're sent to me and they're not that different from what we already talked about.
Right,
I
right.
don't go back, but I'd like to see them because I don't know what the heck
I
I'll
think
talk
I
about.
can save them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
Um,
right. So, you
wow. Rachel says she looked up World Press Freedom and said we're under Romania.
hmm. Oh, so Romania has a freer press than we
And
do.
us,
Wow.
but that's
Can you put the link on where you looked that up? Oh, she did already. Wikipedia.
yeah.
World Free Press Index. Okay.
Oh well,
Wow.
Wikipedia, I would want to find another source, but still,
All
cool.
right. Do you want to explain to the Facebookers what's going to happen? And then I have never turned Facebook off. So
Oh,
we're going to
okay.
see how this works.
I'm
We
still
will.
here. I haven't left yet.
Oh, Claire's still here. Oh, thank
I'm here for
goodness.
now.
Okay. We don't want you to be late to your appointment. All right. So
No, no.
explain what's
Okay.
going to happen, and Claire will turn off Facebook and stop the recording, and she can save the questions. Yay.
Okay. Yes, excellent. Okay. So, here's what's going to happen now, is that we are going to stop recording. So that we can then be even freer and easier in our conversation in the after party. So the after party, we can talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about, and that's what we're going to sort of move into now. If you're watching us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. That's ncheteach.org/conversations, and then you poof, will be in the after party. Those of you who are already here, you just need to stay here and poof, you will be in the after party. Um, what else do I want to say? I want to say thank you all for being here. I want to say thank you to Claire and Annie and NCHE and Jessica and John. I want to say thank you for coming here week after week and making these conversations happen because as I discover when I, for some reason, can't be here, it makes my brain want to explode because I so look forward to and want this opportunity to just engage and talk with people and work things out. So, thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy on a Friday morning. And I mean it when I say that because that's what we're doing. We're questioning, we're asking, we're evaluating, we're engaging, and it matters. So, okay, I think I've said what I need to say. I always feel like I forgot something. Um, but we can now go to the after party.